Awesome. Well, welcome again, everybody. I'm Erica Bear, and I am currently a superintendent in Oregon and have been an educator for over 20 years and really, really passionate about educational leadership and moving systems forward through how we communicate and build relationships with folks. And I'm here with my good friend Tiffany and my cat, who will be making frequent appearances and apologies in advance.
Erica, you're showing the notes view,
Oh, oh shoot. Okay, I'll
which is
fix that.
fine. Well, you sort that. I'll say hi. Hey, everybody. I'm Tiffany Burns. I've been in education for over 20 years. I've taught elementary, middle, high school. I now work in higher ed. I've been a principal of schools for 12 years. And a couple years ago, Erica and I wrote our first book, Connecting Through Conversation, a playbook for talking with students. And we've been traveling all over talking to folks about how to have really hard conversations with kids and how to do that and build connection and help de escalate. And it's been really wonderful. And everywhere we go, folks are like, this is so great. How do we do this with grown-ups? And so, we wrote that book. And so that one's coming out this spring, and you're getting a sneak peek at it now. We would love for you to just, while we're chatting, maybe put your name and where you're from in the chat so we can get to know a little bit about you as well. And
Yeah, and
forever destiny with your hearts for us. Love
yes,
that.
thank you. And as you're entering who you are and where you are, if you could let us know kind of the age range of
Oh,
kiddo that you work with or with the program that you support, what age you serve, that would be helpful for us. All right. And with that, we will kind of dive in.
okay. So a lot of our work, I'm going to say all of our work, centers on this idea that we have to do things with care. Like we got into education because we care about kids, we love kids, and we also really love and appreciate the educators who support them. And so we have to continue to think about this idea of caring. And Erica and I call it caring out loud. And so one of the ways that we show how much we care. We have all kinds of different strategies on our website to care out loud, but one of the ways for this, when we're specifically talking about difficult conversations, is caring enough to have the conversation. And now you all are in education. I'm seeing that you're from all over. You know how hard these conversations can be. And so it is really tempting for us, for all of us, to say, gosh, I don't really want to have this conversation. Or if I just ignore it, will it go away? And we all, and I thank you for shaking your head no, because we know that's not what's going to happen, right? These conversations don't just, or the situations don't just magically resolve themselves. So we have to work on ways to have the conversations and really remember why we're having it. And so when we're having these tougher conversations with students caregivers, and that's what we call folks families, because we have many students who don't live with a mom or dad, they live with aunt, uncle, grandma, whoever, so we call them caregivers. um, we're sharing informations with students caregivers because we care about our students, and if we don't share it, we can't partner together to address it. If a colleague has done something that's caused harm or confusion or broken trust, then we care enough about that colleague, that teacher, their students to provide that feedback to help them get better, even though it might be hard to hear. And the part that I think is tricky for all of us who, and Erica and I believe that anyone who talks with students is an educator. Um, but it's hard for educators to sometimes want to share that information because we care so much and we don't want to hurt their feelings or we don't want to upset them. So sometimes what we do is we soften the message, and we soften the message so much we lose the meaning. So how do we do this? How do we have these conversations that we know that we have to have? We know that they're hard and we know that we need to be really clear in having them so the message isn't lost. Well, that's what we're going to share with you today. So you're in luck.
All
We
right. And
do have Oh, go ahead, Erica.
if it's helpful to you to have the PowerPoint for later, or if you want to keep track of it as you're going on your own device, feel free to grab this through the QR code. And I think Liv is also going to drop a link in the chat. It's just connecting through conversation.com/resources. And that way you'll have it for future if you don't want to be taking notes furiously as we go through. All right. So the first thing that we really think about when it comes to entering these conversations, and we're, these conversations are hard. And a lot of what's hard about it is it's many of the factors are not within our control, right? The person showed up at a time we weren't expecting. Something happened with maybe another staff member that we supported where they made a decision that led to something that was really hard. And now we're trying to fix that or clean that up a little bit. And we can't control all of those factors. The only thing we really can control is our response to it and how we're showing up um, as our best self and also maintaining our cool and our calm so that we can activate the parts of our brain that are going to help us move through it in a productive way. And so there's a lot to that, but the reason, and we're going to talk more, but the reason it's so important is because the emotions that we're putting out into the space are really contagious, and that is going to lead to the success or not of the conversation. So if we show up really hot, if we show up really frustrated, or we're matching that, we're going to be in a tough spot in terms of coming to a successful resolution. So um, we want them to catch our calm.
Yeah.
Team
And
that up.
Eric and I share this in actually both of our books because it's helpful for adults working with students and it's helpful for adults working with adults. It's also helpful if you happen to have teenagers at home or challenging family members. This idea that emotions are contagious. And so, Eric and I really, when we were writing our first book, we spent a lot of time thinking about the art and the science of connection and of building relationships. And we really wanted to spend time digging into that science. So, one of the parts that is absolutely fascinating to us is that this idea really that emotions are contagious and there's a real science behind that. So, as humans, we are hardwired for connection. We all have in our brains mirror neurons, and Erica and I like to think of these as our empathy cells, right? So, when we observe someone having an emotional experience, our mirror neurons start to match in our own bodies the experience we're seeing someone else having. So it might not be happening to us, but we feel it as if it is. So, a couple examples of this. Um, let's say, for example, hypothetically, you or me, and you happen to pick up your cell phone while you're driving, and a police officer pulls you over and writes you a $260 ticket, hypothetically, in Oregon for being on your cell phone. And you call your dear friend Erica because you were absolutely livid because you were not, in fact, on your cell phone. You were literally just picking it up and moving it over, and you still got this huge ticket. And by the time, okay, not hypothetical, for real happened. By the time I'm off the phone with Erica, I am like super grumpy. Erica was in a totally fine mood. And by the time she hung up with me, like, I'm sorry, I think I maybe ruined her morning. Like,
It's true.
she caught all of my grump and righteous indignation that I should not have gotten this ticket. Well, the same thing can be true. So the other day, Erica's a superintendent in a wonderful district, and I've been working with some of her principals there. She calls me over the moon because of some of this data that just came in for how her students have improved their reading scores and just how excited she is. And I was not in the best mood to begin with. She calls and tells me this and starts sharing the student achievement data, and I'm like, are you kidding? This is so exciting. And I, maybe you don't dance when you're really excited, but I do. And so I'm like dancing and like jumping around, like, this is so cool. I'm so excited. And I caught that excitement that she had through the phone, right? Like my mirror neurons turned on, we connected, and I felt those emotions that she was putting out. At the same time earlier, she felt the ones that I did as well. This doesn't just work with people that you're really connected with. This works with anybody in a space. And so it's really, really important that we consider this idea of the contagion of emotions. So when we're talking with someone who's really escalated or really frustrated or upset about something, we might get angry back. Like we might be like, oh, yeah, no, I'm really mad at you too now. Or a lot of times under that anger is a lot of fear and anxiety, and that's also easy for us to catch. So we could be in conversation with them. All of a sudden, for me, I start to feel it in my belly, like my stomach gets nervous. I feel those little bit of butterflies. My hands might get a little sweaty. I might start breathing more shallow. My heart rate might speed up just a bit. What we want to do when that happens is not beat ourselves up. We're not going to do blame or shame. We're going to go, oh, look at that. Inside thoughts, right? Oh, look at that. I'm connected. I'm connected to this person. So I'm going to just take a moment and purposefully and intentionally unmatch. So I'm going to notice, I'm going to become aware that this is happening in my body, and I'm going to unmatch. I like to take deep breaths. I like to make sure my feet are planted firmly on the ground. And then I want to unmatch also the vocal patterns that they're doing. Sometimes when people get louder and faster, the temptation is to match them. We're not going to match them. When they go louder and faster, we're going to go lower and slower. And we're going to really purposefully unmatch, talk in a lower volume, talk slower, take some time to breathe, maybe take a moment to get a drink of water, and make sure that we are not matching their emotions, but what we're trying to do is have them match ours.
Right, because it is kind of a magical thing. It's really dangerous to pick up other people's emotions if they're not what you want to catch, but to be able to put what we're wanting to see them get to into the space can go a long way towards shifting the tenor of the conversation, right? Because our big job when someone walks in and is feeling really escalated is to diffuse that situation or to bring them to a calmer place. So, we are going to speak in a lower and slower tone. By the way, this is what every kindergarten teacher on the planet knows, right? Like when we start doing that, works with kids too. Same thing with grown-ups. And so there are also some sentence stems that can be really, really helpful when we've got someone who's really feeling worried or upset about something. And it really has to do with making sure that they feel very listened to. And we go into that in a significant amount, but also that we're acknowledging what's going on for them. So, in terms of listening, saying things like, I hear you, right? I've made a note of that can be really powerful. If they see us writing it down, go, oh, let me make sure I capture that. And you actually write it physically down on a piece of paper. That lets the person know that you are taking them seriously and seriously enough to actually write down whatever they said. Again, we're not saying that we agree with what they said or that we're going to, take the action that they're asking us to, but we're really giving some emphasis on what they're trying to tell us. The other thing to do is just kind of use some of that reflective listening. Let me make sure I get this right. I want to make sure I understand what the real, what's going on here. Let me make sure I captured what you just shared with me and then actually list those things back out. And so the trick with that is to not get to like what I hear you saying is, and then repeating back verbatim. Like that can feel a little patronizing. So instead, you're gonna be like, okay, so I want to make sure I understand. I heard you share X, Y, Z. Did I capture what it is you're trying to communicate with me? Right. And just letting them know that you really heard and understand what they said. Because the trick with someone who's really escalated is if they know that you understand what they're sharing, they can stop demonstrating it. And so if they're really mad, they need to make sure that you understand why they're really mad, or they're going to keep showing you how mad they are, if that makes sense. So just making sure that they really understand that they've been understood. The other trick here is to just acknowledge that it's important to them, right? Sometimes other folks's emergency or other folks's things that they're feeling really worked up about in our own minds, we might be like, this is just not that big of a deal, right? Sometimes it is, but sometimes you're like, this feels like a small potatoes issue, right? And but for them, it's a huge deal. And anytime we're talking about someone's kid, right, it's a huge deal. When we're talking about someone's performance or what's happening in their work life, it's a big deal. And so these things are huge for them. And so we just need to acknowledge that. Saying things like, this is super important. I'm so glad you brought this to me. My cat is blocking my screen. I'm taking this very seriously, right? I'm taking this very seriously. Sometimes we can't say what we're going to be doing, especially if it's a personnel matter or we're talking about student discipline. We can't be sharing the specifics, but we can say, this is really important, this is really serious, and I'm taking it very seriously. And that lets them know that you're going to be doing follow-up actions. Even if you can't give them all the specifics, it lets them know that you are taking it seriously. Being able to say, you know what, I'm so sorry this happened. Like, even we're not admitting that it's our responsibility, we're not taking responsibility, but we're just empathizing that this is a situation that we're in. Like, I'm so sorry we're in this place, right? Like, that's a bummer. I'm so sorry that happened. And then kind of you can move into problem solving. But again, just acknowledging that this is a big deal for them. If we really did mess up, like if something happened and it was not okay, right? And maybe it wasn't our individual fault, maybe it was someone on our team, maybe it was something, with an outside person, or maybe it was us. Um, Being able to assure them that you recognize that as a mistake and then take responsibility to ensure that it's not going to happen again, right? Same thing we do when we're teaching kids how to take accountability. Like, we're going to do our best to make it right. And part of that is making sure it doesn't happen again. So maybe we need to put in a system. Maybe we need to have some kind of safety protocol. Maybe we need to clean up a communication channel. Whatever it is that led to the issue, letting them know we're taking action and we're going to fix it. Right. And so that can be really a useful tool when we're working through an apology.
Well, and I think, Erica, can I jump in for just a
Yeah.
sec with that piece? I think what's really helpful is when somebody's calling and they're having a meeting and they're talking with you and they're really upset about this thing that happened, right? Again, that I'm so very sorry this happened. That really helps them. Like I had a number of people go, "Oh, okay, that's not what I was expecting." But then when we say we're working to ensure this doesn't happen again, a lot of times what folks want to do is share over and over those details. They want to live in the conflict. They want to tell you all the ways that whatever happened was wrong. And so we're not ignoring that or dismissing that, but we're working to ensure nothing like that happens again. That helps move us forward. Like I can't fix what happened in the past, but I am trying to move us forward. And that helps oftentimes them start to move forward with us.
And then finally, there are times that misinformation gets out there, right? So, and this can happen in all kinds of environments, right? On a group of on a staff where folks are working together, rumors can get going and misinformation can happen, right? This is not uncommon. With kids, sometimes they'll go home and explain something to their parents in a way that isn't exactly accurate in terms of what actually took place, right? And it's not maybe that they're lying, but they're sharing a version of events that is maybe leaving out a key detail, or they're part of it. And so when that happens, we want to make sure that we can correct the misunderstanding so they have good information, but not be like, that's a lie, right? Like, that's not helpful either. So what we instead want to say is, you know what? Gosh, I would be really upset too if that's what I was told. Or gosh, if that's what I understood, I'd be really upset too. Like, yeah, that would be bad, right? And so if you and then say, can I give you a little bit more information? Or I want to share with you a little bit more, or it sounds like there might be something out there that isn't totally accurate. I want to be able to provide you with some facts to help you know how to move forward. So when there's misinformation out there, we don't want to just let it go because then it can fester. So this allows us to kind of set the record straight um, without saying that, that's not true, right? Because that just makes us sound defensive.
Well, and it
Um,
helps them save face. If somebody
yeah,
calls you and tells you this thing that really isn't accurate,
right,
you're able to
right.
say, wow, yeah, I totally get why you'd be so upset about that. I would be
Mhm.
too if that's what I thought happened. It helps them save face so they don't have that big embarrassed kind of guilty response that they're also perhaps going to take out on you. So,
Right. We don't want that. And yeah, absolutely. The other thing that can really help when we're in an escalated conversation is to help everyone remember that we are on the same team. So, really identifying what those common purposes are. When we're working with kids, when we're supporting kids in a program, we have a common mission. Everyone who's supporting that program has a common mission that has to do with the best possible outcomes for the kids in front of us, right? Like, and it's worded a little bit differently everywhere, and there's different details, but that mission is true everywhere. You're here because you want to do right by kids, right? And we're here to do everything we can to support kids. So when we're having conversations with the folks that we work with or that we're supporting, it's helpful to point some of those things out, right? Like, we can both agree that it's really important that all of the students feel safe while they're in our program, right? I'm sure you agree that everyone that it's really important that families are getting the communication that they need when they need it, so we can all support our kids to do what we need, right? I'm sure we can all agree that this kind of behavior is not leading to the outcomes that we want for our kids, right? Those are things that it's hard for someone to disagree with.
Mhm.
We want what's best for our kids. We want everyone to feel safe. We want everyone to make progress on whatever the goals are. So with educators, that's easy. With caregivers, it's not that different. We all want what's best for Johnny. We all want what's best for Julian, right? We all want what's best for the student that we're talking about or the kiddo we're talking about. And so it's pointing that out. The disagreement most often comes in how we get there, right? It's about the strategies that we're using, not about the outcome that we want. And so it's just really helpful to point that out. And sometimes our points of agreement can be really small. Like it could be as
Mhm.
simple as like, we can both agree that the student or the staff handbook says that you have to be here at this time, or we can both agree that the schedule we have outlined is this, or it's clear that our program is done at 6 o'clock, and the expectation is that folks are here by 6 o'clock to pick up. Whatever it is, right? Sometimes that's as small as it can be, but we still want to point those things out, right? And then we can identify that common interest. What can we do to support James? What can we do to support sticking to the schedule? And sometimes that looks like moving to some out of the box solutions. Sometimes that means like I had an idea what we should be doing. You had an idea what we should be doing, and neither one works for both of us. So what's that third idea? What's that place that can get us all moving towards that solution that's going to work for everyone?
When we take that time to identify the common purpose, and like Erica said, sometimes it's really small and sometimes we have to dig deep. Sometimes we're like, what is it that we are agreeing on here? And we have to do a little bit of homework to think about how we can find those points of agreement. Because the thing is, when we are in kind of a conflict situation or a conflict conversation with someone, they are not identifying points of conflict or points of common purpose. They aren't looking for those, right? They are like, you are here and I am over here and we are not meeting. So it's our job to find way, if we want to have a stronger relationship with them, we have to find ways where we do align. Some sentence stems, like especially if you're having to really dig deep, that can be really helpful, are saying things like, thanks so much for partnering with me on this, right? Like I really appreciate that we're working together. I know we're not totally seeing eye to eye, but I really appreciate you working with me on this to figure this out for your child or to figure this out for this situation. Then again, like Erica said, saying things like we both want the same thing. We both want students to be successful. We both want people to be safe. We both want everybody to feel joyful when they come into work. Whatever that line is, we want to make sure that we're saying it and we mean it. We need to be genuine and authentic when we're saying it. And then this last one, Eric and I both use this one all the time. And it's the idea that when we're in conversation with someone, we use the word we and us as much as possible. And when we're saying we're talking about we, the people in the conversation. So even the people that we're in conflict with, we're talking about them and our we or them and our us. I'm not saying like our expanded learning program feel this way if I'm talking with a caregiver, right? I'm saying we together. What I'm trying to do is again point out that we're on the same team. And when I use language like we and us, that's a lot different than like us and them kind of thing. So what we're trying to do is help them see in their brains and hear in our language that we are on the same team.
Yeah. And I think this is helpful not only with caregivers, but also with the staff that we're supporting, right? If we're
Absolutely.
working towards a goal, if we're working on changing a behavior, being able to say something like, okay, so, we need to get this figured out. How can we ensure that you're going to be on time every day? I'm sure that isn't an issue you guys actually deal with, but as an example, right? How can we work together to make sure that, we have consistent, you showing up consistently on time? And what that demonstrates, I'm not the one who's going to be showing up or picking them up and getting them there on time, but I'm there on their side to help figure out how to scaffold this so that it's going to work moving forward. I can brainstorm different ideas, we can talk through the barriers. I'm on your team to figure this out, right? Like if we're having a lot of behavior concerns in a program, how are we going to address this, right? Maybe that other person that you're talking with is the person who's going to be carrying out a lot of the actions, but you're on that team to help figure it out, talk it through, provide advice and tools to get us there. So again, it just that team piece is really critical.
And this is a sentence stem that I use a lot. And this, when you're in those situations and someone does something that is absolutely shocking, and you're the person in charge, so you're the person that has to respond to it. And as you're watching this situation unfold, and oftentimes it's not just unfolding with you and this other person, it's unfolding with you and this other person, and then a whole slew of people that are watching and like going, I wonder what's going to happen here. And it could be this big outburst, it could be this big shocking thing that this person has done. And at first, everyone that's watching is looking at them. And then when they realize that you're the person in charge, they're watching you and they're trying to figure out like how are you going to respond to this situation. And you've got some people that are in the back like eating popcorn, just like I could binge watch this show all day long. Like what is she going to do to handle this situation? And in your head you're thinking, what am I going to do to handle this situation? Like what were my life choices that put me in this situation that made it be so I'm in charge? What the, you don't say any of those things out loud, right? None of those are all inside thoughts. What you can say out loud is, well, that was unexpected. And that's it, right? Like, so what you're doing is you're telling everybody else in the room, I am cool, collected. I have this under control. I am not freaking out. You might be freaking in, but they don't need to know that, right? What you say is, wow, that was unexpected. And then you move on. And that buys you time to figure out what on earth you're going to do to respond to this situation. This is really helpful with adults. This is really helpful with students as well. Erica and I, a couple of years ago, we were keynoting Office Managers Conference in Utah, and we taught this. And later we got this email from one of the office managers, and she was like, oh my gosh, this happened in the office the other day. I had an office full of people. This lady came in, screamed obscenities, was super upset, walked out, slammed the door, and then everybody of course is staring at me. And she goes, I said, well, that was unexpected. And then I just moved on and I looked like a rock star. So we're just trying to help you look like a rock star.
That's it. And I mean, important to circle back. Obviously, we're not going to let a lot of that
Absolutely.
behavior go. And sometimes you have to say, well, that was unexpected. We'll be circling back to that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you move on, right? Like you just let them
Mm-hmm.
know, well, I'm not dropping this, but man, I'm not solving it now either. So, all right. So we know when someone comes, we were talking about like when the reaction seems a little bit out of proportion to the situation, right? Oftentimes there is so much going on below the surface, right? There's so much happening that we can't see. So when someone comes in really mad, we want to get to a place of real curiosity. We want to really try and figure out what's actually going on for this person right now. With caregivers, oftentimes this is about a lot of fear that's an angst around their kid, right? They're worried that maybe they're losing control. They're worried that they're not safe where they are. They're worried that they're growing up and going to leave them. They're worried that they have to send their kiddo to school I mean, there's so many different things, right? And maybe that's what it's really about. um we have to remember that like instinct as a caregiver, we think about that caregiver bear, right? That mama bear that you're not going to want to stand between them and their cub because that is a real instinct, right? In Ashland, we have deer everywhere. Like we have so many deer, it's ridiculous. It is not exciting for us to see deer. They mainly just slow down traffic, but you have to be really careful. You're not wanting to get in between a grown deer and a fawn. Like that is going to be dangerous for you. And we have to remember that we all have the capacity. If we are a caregiver, we can lose all sense of being rational when it comes to our own kid. We all have that capacity to flip to a place of irrationality. And so that happens for folks. And we have to just be aware of that. And when that does happen, we have to recognize some of what's happening in their biology, right? They're going to have a lot of adrenaline running through their system, which means they're not able to think very clearly. Their communication is going to be hampered by that. So we're going to have to be a little bit more patient, right? And really be thinking through, okay, they're reacting to a lot right here. And this happens with staff too. It's not just a caregiver instinct, right? If I'm really upset about something I'm scared is going to happen, but I'm bringing this smaller thing up over here, we've got to kind of dig and just be like, I'm curious, like, is there more happening? And so we have some sentence stems to help with that. And oftentimes it's about asking them what the solution is, right? Like, what would a resolution to this solution to this situation look like for you? Because if we can get to what they're trying to fix, it can help us understand the problem, right? How can I support you? Or what does support look like in this situation? What would be most helpful in order to move forward, right? Like that idea of moving forward. Like, I hear you, I've acknowledged what's going on for you is a big deal. What is a step we can take to move forward? And sometimes what they share with us in response to these questions help us crystallize what's going on, right? Staff member comes in really upset that another staff member said something that they thought was rude, right? And you're like, oh, the bummer. You're trying to like think through that and like, well, what would be most helpful? And you start to realize that what they're really nervous about is that they don't have a good collegial relationship with this person, and they're worried that that's impacting the kiddos, right? So there's more going on, right? And so we have to dig a little bit to understand more.
All right,
Okay.
y'all. So, transparent facilitation here.
Yeah.
We were planning on putting people in breakout rooms so everybody could talk. And Liv told us that if we do that, some of you are going to drop off, and that will make us sad. So I think what we'll do is just keep you on here. And if anybody wants to, we can do the next one there, Erica. So we can do this together. Typically, we'd have you talk a little bit together and then come back, but Zoom makes things a little different. So if there's any comments or questions that you'd like to unmute and share. If you want to put in the chat, we can have a moment to debrief now. Unless
Yeah. And
somebody unmutes and is like, put me in a breakout room, and then we'll do that.
I think, and really what we're wondering is what's really resonating for you? What are you like, yes, this is a good reminder, or is there anything that you're like, I'm not sure about that. That doesn't make sense to me. Yeah.
I have a question or I don't know, comment. I was wondering, because I think I've tried the when they go high, you go low.
Yep.
I
Thank
Yep.
know.
you,
Yep.
Michelle Obama. Thank you,
Okay.
Michelle Obama.
I noticed for some people, and it just depends on what the situation is. I know that it's situational, but I noticed that it doesn't work for all.
Yeah.
So what do you do when they're just going?
Yeah.
And you're trying to go low, but for some that angers or ignites something in them.
Right.
Or maybe I haven't found that balance of what did you say earlier? You said sometimes it be condescending, or if
Right.
you are, repeating step by step of what
Mhm.
you think they are
Yeah.
trying to explain to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you suggest we do in those moments?
Yeah. I mean, Tiffany, jump in, but I think for me, when someone is just really, really escalated, that probably means they're not in a great place to have a conversation. And so I try and move that to a planned conversation, which we're going to talk about here in just another second. And I'll say something like, wow, this is really important. I can see you're very upset. I'm very concerned about it also. I'm really, want to try and figure this out. Let's set up a time where we can really address it together in a more thoughtful way. And we do have some sentence stems. We're going to talk about that some more. There are times when people are really just they can push it to a point where it's not appropriate. Like we can take a lot, but we should not be taking a whole lot of verbal abuse from folks. And so there are some things that we need to do to sometimes just end those conversations and just say, you know what, this isn't productive. This conversation isn't productive right now. We're going to have to end it and come back to it at another time. And there are times when you have to kind of say that on a loop. You're kind of using that broken record technique and you're just saying the same words over and over. And then you have to take yourself out of the situation if they don't do that themselves. But, most often, if you can find that good balance of like just a couple notes lower than them and just a little bit slower than them, it can bring the temperature down. But when someone's really escalated, it takes them a while to catch our calm, right? It's not going to
Yeah.
happen immediately. Yeah.
And there's a whole, and Alana put a fantastic thing in the chat, which I really, really appreciate as well. And then there's this whole other strategy that we talk about. We're not going to get into today, but it's in both of our books. It's Acknowledge, Validate, Coach, where we're acknowledging the emotion that they're sensing the person is having. So angry, like, yep, you're really angry. I can see you're really angry about this. I can see you're really upset. I can see you're really frustrated. Then you validate. Like, I can understand why you'd be really angry about this. I get it. I can see why you'd be really upset. And then and it's a little bit of a longer process, but I'm giving you like the Cliff Notes version. You do the acknowledge and then you do the validate. And then after you can move into that coach part of just like, hey, I think that if they're not calm in that point, let's move this to a time that this can be a more productive conversation. Or then if that a lot of times that in and of itself calms them down. But can you tell me how to pronounce your name?
Thank you. Shaquisha.
Shaquisha, thank you. I think it matters too if you're talking to a staff or a caregiver, right? Like the way that you respond to staff is going to be really different than caregiver in some ways, or it can be depending on, what's the relationship that you have with them. If you have a really strong relationship with them, it's a lot easier to be like, ooh, I can see you are upset about this. And let us talk about this when we're both able to really have this productive conversation. You might have to be a little bit more firm with the caregiver if they're being, like Erika said, kind of verbally abusive. Liv,
Got
I
it.
love it. Thank you. Thanks for your question, Shaquisha. I really appreciate it. And I think we have time for one more or one comment. And I love folks putting stuff in the chat. And I'll put the name of that because it's on our website too. I think we have blogs on it, Erika.
We do. Yep. The blog
I
is called The
wanted
Magic Formula. Yep.
I wanted to say that I put in the chat, a soft word turns away raft. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Soft word turns away wrath, and I tried to do that, and sometimes, most times it does work, going low and slow, um, but I really do try to implement that in the midst of a conversation. But then I'll give you an example. But then, in the middle of the conversation, you're calm and you know what to do, but then they call you a name. And it's like, okay, how do I move? Because now I've been stuck with a pen or, whatever. So now it's like, okay, what do I do from here? And I go, okay, I think I need to shut up and just not say anything and go to okay, so let's pick a date and a time where we can sit down calmly and talk about, what's going on. Because now I'm going above 98 degrees,
Right. Right.
So yeah.
And I'm so sorry that's happened. And name calling is just, it's not appropriate. And it's not, like we are absolute, we're in service and we help support our students and we support our staff and we don't have to take abuse. And so in that
Right, right.
situation, if someone is name calling, you are welcome to say like, whoa, I need a minute and I think I'm going to have to call this meeting now and we can get together when we can have a more productive conversation. But at this point, I'm done having a conversation and we'll talk about this as we go, but just, you know, um, the same way that we will speak with you respectfully, we expect that you speak with us respectfully and end it. You don't have to sit there and have those, continue to have those conversations. And I will say, what we're talking about is ideally this person is catching our calm. But it's really helpful for us to remember that the only person in this conversation that we can control is us. And so if we do not catch their angst, their anger, their escalation, and we just do our best to keep ourselves calm and to not match them and to not further escalate the situation, then we can leave the situation feeling proud of ourselves. Like, I showed up the best I could. They did some ridiculous name call things or whatever it was. And I still showed up to where I can be proud of how I was in that conversation. That's all that we can control. I really
And
appreciate you all asking
also,
those questions.
yeah. And I would just add too, I think you said something that's really important, which is recognizing when you're no longer going to be able to be productive in the conversation, right? Because we're all human people. And name calling is not okay. And so there are moments when you just have to say, you know what? I'm not going to be able to show up as my best self. Like that got a little too personal. And I'm happy to attack the problem. I'm not going to sit in a situation where people are being attacked. And so, we're going to have to go to it. So it's important to recognize that in ourselves as well, and take a different tact. So thank you.
All right,
All
y'all.
right.
It's like we planted
Yep.
you with
Yep.
this next piece because
Yes.
all these conversations are leading up to this next idea of
Mm.
transitioning to a planned conversation. And so, as folks that are leaders, as folks that are responsible for solving lots of problems, we have people come up to us all the time and say things like, "Hey, do you have 5 minutes?" And in our head, we are like, I do not have 5 minutes. I don't even have 1 minute. I have like zero, I have negative minutes right now. Like, no. Or we might be thinking, you do not need 5 minutes. I know you. You want a very long time. This is not going to take just 5 minutes. What do we say in those situations? Because none of the things that we're thinking are things that we can say out loud. And so, what we want to do whenever we can is transition ourselves to a planned conversation. We want to make sure that we have time that it's scheduled. We want to make sure that we are in a good place to have the conversation. We want to make sure we're prepared. We might have needed to do homework. We might need more kind of information before we sit down with them. So if somebody is really escalated, we also want them to have a little bit of time to cool off as well. So what we do is transition them to a planned conversation, but not by saying, no, I don't have time right now, right? Because what that comes off as, even what you mean is just like, no, I'm just running late. But if you say, I don't have time to have that right now, what they hear is, I don't have time for you, or you're not important to me. And that's not what you mean, right? But that's the message that they're taking. So, what we suggest are some of these sentence stems to kind of tuck into your back pocket. And you can say something like, this conversation is really important. I want to make sure I give it the time it deserves. So, then let's find a time where we can schedule and sit down together and have this conversation. Or I'm committed to finding out how we got here. I need a little bit of time to do some investigation so we can work together towards solution. Or, this is way too critical for this to be rushed. Let's schedule a time when we can problem solve together. For all of those things, you do have to then schedule a time, right? You can't just like put them off until forever. You do have to schedule that time to meet with them, but those buy you a little bit of time in doing so.
Yeah, and oftentimes when staff that I'm supporting does that, right? And that happens probably more often than parents. We're like, "Oh, do you have a second or do you have a minute?" And you're like, "Nope." But what I'll often say is, "Oh my gosh, you're worth so much more than a minute. Let's find a time when we can have 15, and just kind of take it to the idea that they're too important for us to rush the conversation either. Okay, so then this has bought us some time. Now we can actually prepare. So if we see a conversation coming, we know it's going to be tough. Either they brought us a situation, or maybe we're addressing a performance concern or something that's really difficult going on for a kiddo. And we're needing to share that with their caregivers. There's some steps we can go through to help prepare for that. So on that same resources page, that same link, there's a bunch of different resources on there. One of them is preparing for these conversations. And these are the steps. We're going to go into each one, but really just getting clear on the purpose for the conversation, choosing how we're going to communicate the information, when we're going to do it, where, and being really clear on what we're sharing, and then also making plans for any obstacles that might come up. The first thing is to get really clear on purpose. So Tiffany talked in the beginning, all of these conversations are grounded in care. They're all because we care about the kiddo, we care about the staff member, we care about the culture of the program, we care about the success of the program. It's because we care. We want to make sure that nothing is entering into our motivation around we want to win. We want to punish someone, right? Just for the sake of punishing them because we're mad, right? Or, and this is an easy trap for us, like to keep the peace, right? So we might go into a conversation like we've got to make sure that this behavior changes, but then we're like, oh, we don't want to make them mad, we don't want them to be sad, we don't want our relationship to be hurt, so we kind of soften it, or we don't share all the information. And so if we find ourselves saying things just to kind of like get through it and calm people down, then that's not going to work either. What's helpful for me is to think about these three questions as I'm getting ready to get really clear. What do I want to get out of this conversation? Like when I walk away, what do I want to have had accomplished for me and my objectives? What do I want the other person to gain from the conversation? What do I want them to understand differently or be thinking about differently, or what actions are they going to be taking after this conversation? And then also thinking about what's important for our relationship, what's important for us to be able to team together moving forward. And so just getting some clarity on those before I walk into a conversation can be really helpful.
So when we're having these conversations, one of the well, they're all important, but it's so important to consider the method in which we're going to communicate. Um, as a longtime principal, I cannot tell you the number of times I had to do communication cleanup because someone sent an email that really should have been a phone call. And so it's really important that we consider once I know what's the purpose, what's going to be the what's going to be the best method of sharing that message, right? And so if we're looking at an email, that's when we want it to be, we want to maybe put some facts there. We want it to be short and sweet. We want to say, like, here's the real information that you need. When I very first started as a principal, I got a very long email from a staff member, and she listed out these whole list of things that she was really upset about. And it was long, right? And so I responded that night, point by point, with my own like lengthy novella. And before I sent it to her, I forwarded it to my mentor, who's just a lovely human, thankfully. And the next morning she said to me, "Hey, Tiffany, so how you doing? Are you feeling better after you wrote that?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she goes, "Good. Was it like cathartic?" And I was like, "Yeah." She's like, "Okay, great. Hit delete." We don't send emails that long. That is not a thing that we do. We do that is going to get forwarded to everybody. What I want you to write right now is, "Thank you so much for sharing this with me. It sounds like there's a lot for us to discuss. Let's set up a time to meet." And I was like, "You want me to delete that?" And she's like, "You can save it for a book, but we are not writing this multi-page email." And it was some of the best advice I've ever received, right? Like, we do not send super long emails. Emails don't cover nuance, they don't cover tone, there's no sarcastic font. Like, it is not helpful to send nuance information in. And I know, Valerie, I'm sad about it too. Like, if there is a
Yeah.
sarcastic font, I'm going to find it. But so emails really are, and they can also be for summary of conversation after. Like, as we've had a conversation, we might want to follow up in writing to highlight the key points. But if we need need to call somebody if we need to share something right away, sometimes we don't have time for a sit down meeting. So we do need to pick up the phone and make that phone call. We do need to have that conversation so it's more personal. Um, Sometimes it really needs more than just us there, or the gravity of the situation is a bigger deal. So we need to have a sit down conversation. And then there are times that I want to share a little bit of news and I don't want it to have a lot of weight, or I don't want this person to spend a lot of time thinking about it. So I'll do what I call a drop by conversation. And so, hey, just real quick one to let you know, blah, 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 blah. And then I move on. Or I say it like, a caregiver, somebody comes at pickup and something happened. I don't want it to be a huge thing. So I'm just going to let them know then. And those drop in conversations can be really helpful. Just to get information out and not give it more weight than it really deserves.
And I will just say, for me, what I'm constantly running through my head when I'm tempted to send an email instead of pick up the phone or set up a meeting, email is only to communicate one-way information. No dialogue can occur with email. It is just sharing of neutral information. You cannot have a conversation. You cannot get in a back and forth to problem solve. None of that happens in writing. And so much can be misinterpreted. And as leaders, forwarded to everyone and their cousin. So you've got to be aware of that too. Okay.
So we want to consider just the different pieces of when we're having this conversation and when we're sending the invitation. So considering the timing um, for this. So we want to think about, before we have the conversation, we really want to make sure that we are ready. And that we are really clear and prepared to have it, and that we aren't coming from a place of, I want to put this person in their place, or I'm really frustrated. If that's the case, we probably need to, not probably, we need to pause and wait before we enter into that conversation, because the conversation then, if we jump in too early when we're escalated, then it turns into how we responded and not about this thing that we need to be talking about, right? And we don't want to be making this about us. We also want to think about the time of day. So, if I'm having this conversation with someone, with a staff member right before they're going into work with kids, is that going to set them off? Maybe I want to wait until the end of their shift. Or is this going to make somebody really upset? And are they going to go back and talk to all their coworkers about it? You know what? If so, we're going to have that conversation on a Friday evening, right? This is before you go home on the weekend kind of thing. Sometimes if it is a safety concern and we have to have that conversation right away, then we have less flexibility here in choosing what time of day we have it. It could be that they know this conversation is going to happen, and it's going to cause them some angst and they will not be able to settle until we have it. Then we're going to try to do it as soon as possible. So we're really just considering, when I share this information, I want to make sure I have all the information I need. And then I want to make sure that I'm having it at a time that it's going to be the most successful. The other piece to think about is when we send them the invite, when we let them know, hey, we're having this sit down conversation, and then we have the conversation, we want to think about the amount of time that passes between that. So personally, I don't think it's kind to send someone an email on a Friday night and say, hey, we really have something to talk about, and I'd like to talk to you about it Monday morning. Like that it just doesn't feel really kind. It doesn't feel really genuine. It feels like you were setting them up to have them stress all weekend. And that might be the strategy. Okay. But consider how that impacts the other folks, that we work with. So we want to think about how much time should go. If it's a big conversation for someone to have, I don't want them to have to wait weeks until we have it. Or, sometimes we want to say, like, I want you to be prepared as well. So we're having this conversation, and really it should be within 24 to 48 hours if we can.
If you don't mind me saying, it's that kind of conversation when you would get in trouble and mom would tell you, you wait till your daddy gets home.
That's
You know,
it.
and daddy gets home at 5:05 and it is now 3:05 and you got 2 hours and
Right.
you're
To just
stressing the
sit and
whole
sweat.
entire time,
Right. Yeah.
whatever. But I do have to say, that's not anything that my mother said to us. It wasn't
Good.
about wait till daddy get home. I'm taking care of it now. But anyway, I just thought I'd share.
Yeah.
She could teach it. She could be up
Yeah.
here with
Yeah.
us.
Yeah. No,
love
My
that.
my mom was definitely the one in charge of that as well. So yeah.
Well, and
Uh,
this idea of how long do you need? So when you're
yep.
planning, I know that we are really, really busy people. And so thinking about, oh gosh, okay, I feel like this conversation should take 20 minutes. So I'm going to schedule 20 minutes here and then I'm going to have something right after. Ooh, be gentle with yourself as well, because sometimes we need a bit of time afterward to process. Also, when we're sharing, especially with staff, well, with caregivers as well, when we're sharing big information with them that they might have a large emotional response to, let's honor them enough to not rush that conversation and not try to say, we have to have it and then get right on out, and then we're stressed the whole time we're having it because it has to be rushed. So I really like to plan extra time, and then if I have time at the end, great. That never happens. So really just try not to rush those.
And I do when I'm having a really big deal conversation, like we are human people, this takes a toll on us as well. It's really hard to have some of these conversations. Having a 15-minute buffer to go take a walk, to go, take a beat, really be able to, like, for me, like close my door, turn the lights off. Like I just need a minute to reset, can be really, really helpful. And this one is pretty straightforward, but when we're thinking about where we want to have the conversation, make sure it's the correct amount of privacy, right? Like we don't want to have a conversation where someone's going to be really escalated or we're sharing information that's really personal or confidential. That shouldn't be in a public space, or a place that's really likely to be overheard. We also, with staff, we want to consider like how much gravity do we want this to have, right? Like, is this a conversation we really need to have in my office or with the person who supports us with HR? Or, like we just need to think about that when we're thinking about the location. But the primary piece is it should have the appropriate level of privacy. The other piece that's important when we're thinking about location is really paying attention to body position. Like, how are we setting ourselves up in the room? Um, we know this with kids, right? We don't want to tower over kids. We want to get on their same level as much as we can. Same thing is true here. Like, don't be the person who's like standing over someone who's sitting down in a chair. That's Everyone knows you're in charge. We don't need to flex that. Like, if they're sitting, sit. If they're standing, stand, but stay at the same level. Avoid having a big giant power object in front of you. If you can avoid sitting on opposite sides of the desk, recommend that. Again, everyone knows that you're in charge. We love a round table, two chairs side by side, some way to disrupt that dynamic. One of the things that we know is that if we're standing kind of shoulder to shoulder or seated directly across from someone, that is really a confrontational stance. Like in the animal kingdom, this kind of means like it's on, right? We're about to rumble. And so instead, we want to open that up, be side by side or at a 90-degree angle with someone. Um, this also helps with eye contact. Eye contact is really complicated. I'm not going to get into all of the pieces here, but we know that it's really individually, culturally, and situationally specific. And from a situational perspective, when someone is under stress, eye contact becomes really, really hard. It's really hard to be looking someone in the eye when you're receiving hard information. Okay, so we really recommend using what we call a third point, which is just, well, lots of people call it that. We also call it the third point, which is something in between you that we can both direct our eyes. So if I'm talking about, let's say we received a complaint from a parent, and we're sharing that with a staff member, I might have that complaint in between us so we can both be looking at the complaint. If I have a concern about behavior, maybe I have some behavior data and that's printed and it's in front of us. Or maybe it's, however we're documenting behavior, we're talking to a caregiver, we're going to have that in front of us. And that way we can both put our eyes there and it allows us to make the emotional weight between the people and that third object instead of the two people in dialogue. So using that third point and not forcing eye contact. This is also why, like, I don't know if any of you have teenage children or children in general, but when you're driving in a car, you can get so much more out of them than under any other circumstance. And that's because you're side by side. Eye contact is not forced because someone's got to be watching the road, right? And so all of a sudden, we can be talking more easily. This is why I love a walking meeting. If we can take a walk and have some of these conversations, depending on the gravity of what we're talking about, that can also set up easier communication.
All right, this idea of being clear on the what. And so, really coming to the reason that we transition to a planned conversation is so we can get our homework done before, so we can be prepared to have these conversations. And for me, these are the conversations that are not fun, that keep me up at night, that make me stressed out, that I just do not look forward to. And they are certainly not why I got into education. Right. And so, the more that I can be planned, the more I feel better going into that conversation. I have more confidence because I feel like I'm going to do better in the conversation because I'm prepared. So, in order to do that, we want to list out the things that we're going to talk about. So, for us, I want to list out what are the important facts that I want to make sure to share. I might have printed off different email exchanges. I might have notes or phone calls or written complaints. I might have a list of dates and times with specific examples that let me know these are the pieces that I want to share. And when Erika talked about the third point earlier, this is what we're using for that third point. We're pulling out these bits of information, putting it between us, and instead of having the conversation up here where we're looking at each other's eyes, very stressed out, the emotional weight is more here, and we're talking about the facts and the problem and not necessarily the person. That makes people a lot more open and willing to engage in those conversations.
Yeah, and then the final part of making a plan, right, is to anticipate those obstacles we know are likely to come up. And this could be as simple of like, gosh, I know this person is a talker. Like, I know this meeting is going to go long if I don't set up some parameters. So I'm going to be really tight on the agenda and make those timelines really clear. This could be, you know, that something went wrong for this family last year or a couple of months ago, and you know it's going to come up again. Maybe the organization made some kind of mistake, something happened, and you know that's going to come up. Make a plan to address it, right? If you have a staff member that you're working on some kind of performance issue, and you know that they're going to be bringing something that happened, 3 weeks ago or 5 months ago or whatever, that they're saying this is why, it's because you didn't give me X or I didn't have this. Make a plan for that so that you can be prepared to address it, and be able to stay focused on point with what the conversation is really about. Okay, and we do not have time to actually make a plan, but I do want to point out to you all that we have that as a guide that you can print out and actually fill in. It's on that same resources page again. It's one of the options there. So hopefully you're entered your email at the top so you can just access all of it. The I have a very difficult conversation that I had to have earlier this week on Monday, actually, and I printed this off for myself. Like, it is just a helpful tool, no matter how many times you've had these conversations, to really think through each step. So I hope that that is a helpful resource for you.
Thanks, Liv.
Okay.
Liv put it in the
Thank you, Liv. Yeah.
comments too.
All right. And then we're actually in it. We're having the conversation. So what are some things to pay attention to? So you've planned, you're ready, you've got all your ducks in a row, you've got the materials you need. There are some things to pay attention to while you're in it. The first one is to look out for that kitchen sink. We call it like kitchen sinking it, where they start throwing in all kinds of things that are completely unrelated to what we're supposed to be talking about, right? This is the staff member who's like, well, you didn't give me, 5 weeks ago, you didn't tell me with enough notice that I needed X, or I missed my break 2 weeks ago, or whatever the pieces are. And they just kind of throw in everything that they can. And it's really important for us to keep the conversation on track, not by addressing each of those things, because that just makes us look defensive and it sidetracks the conversation. So instead, we're going to say something like, well, gosh, I'm sorry that happened. Today, we're here to talk about X. Or that sounds like something we need to talk about. We'll schedule a time, but today we're here to talk about this, and just making sure that we stick to the agenda. We have to also hold ourselves to the same standard. So if we're there to talk about a specific thing, make sure that you're not like throwing in a bunch of other extraneous things that are not going to be helpful in getting to that purpose that you were so clear on when you were planning out this conversation, which is that idea of staying focused on what you really want. So be clear. Don't get sidetracked. Don't let your emotions get involved. The other piece that I um, caution people on here is, if you went in because it's really important that this behavior change, and then you start backtracking on that in the conversation, or you start kind of soft pedaling, you've lost track of what you were wanting to get out of the conversation. And then you've sat through a really awkward conversation and you didn't get what you wanted at all. And you're going to have to do it again. So just stay focused on that purpose as you're going through. Also, and this is from Crucial Conversations, make sure, and we talked about this a little bit, that you are not, I'm sorry, my cat all of a sudden is very interested in what's happening. Make sure that you are not trying to win a situation, right? This isn't a competition, right? We're trying to solve a problem. We're not out to punish people. Like, there are times where there are consequences for actions, but it's not about like, I'm going to show you kind of thing. Again, make sure that you aren't doing things just to keep the peace. Like, if you're doing something and you know it's not the right thing, or it's not holding someone to their greatness, then we need to make sure that we aren't doing that. And then the last one is that it's really critical that we make it about the problem and not about the person, right? We're trying to solve a problem. We're trying to improve a situation. We're not going to get into personal attacks. And we're going to make sure that it's staying focused on that and not the person, right? A strategy for all conversations, related, unrelated, is this idea of sharing your story and asking for theirs. So we are by nature pretty self-centered. Like, we are paying attention to ourselves first. And so we can oftentimes make up stories, and we make ourselves the stars of the story, right? So imagine that time that like you're walking down the street and you see someone and you're like, "Oh, hey." And they just keep walking and don't say anything. And so you start making up this whole story about, well, probably 3 weeks ago I said this thing and maybe they're mad, and that's probably they're not talking to me now. And like, you go make up this whole thing, and really they just didn't see you or they didn't hear you, right? And we've gone down this whole road. The same thing can happen with work all the time. So these are examples that are all real. But this is kind of how it sounds. It's where you're kind of testing. You're saying, you know what, this is the story I'm telling myself. It probably isn't true, or probably only a part of it is true. And so you're trying to get the accurate information from the other person. It also is a way to bring up a situation without putting them immediately on the defensive, because you're saying, this is a story I'm telling myself. It's probably not true. Like, help me understand, right? So it allows them to enter into it without getting super defensive. So this first example, when you said in a staff meeting that this is just another attempt by administration to take away teacher autonomy, it made me think you're feeling disrespected since I'm part of administration. Is that right? Like, are you feeling disrespected by me? If that's what's happening, let's talk about it, right? When I came out on the playground and you were not where we had agreed, I worried that you were not following the schedule. I found this frustrating as we'd gone over it several times. Can you help me understand what happened? Right? Like, probably there's a reason, probably there's something going on. Help me understand. When you didn't reply to my 3 emails about the goal setting process we have to go through, I realized I was telling myself stories for the reasons you weren't responding. What happened? And I don't need to say what the story is, right? I can just be like, I'm making stuff up here. I need to understand what's really going on. So, a helpful technique to keep people from getting defensive.
Well, and what you're doing is you're showing vulnerability by saying, hey, here's what I'm thinking and here's what I was telling myself. So you're being vulnerable there. People respond well to that. People are like, oh, no, wait, that's not what I meant. Or, yeah, I guess that's kind of true. Another thing to think about when we are trying to move something forward or when we are trying to convince someone about something, we need to consider what their logic style is. And there are really two types of logic styles, and we can be both, or we can lean more one or the other. But sometimes folks are moved or decided to change or inspired to make a difference or inspired to make a change because of practical and logical type of responses. So these folks want data, reasons, they want facts, they want all the information around it. This is why we're needing to make this change. Sometimes folks are more moved or inspired to change based on story and compassion. So for some folks, like if I'm saying, hey, we've got all of these kids that are coming in, super late, and this is a problem. I've got this many kids that are coming in late, and this is causing, this to be late and blah, 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 blah. I might be telling someone this whole story about the data and all of the number of people that it impacts and how and what those impacts are. Somebody else, I might be saying, hey, let me tell you what happened for Tina the other day. So you came in late with this student and blah, blah, blah. And this is how it impacted her. And it really changed her whole, ability to do her job. What we want to think about is, are we using a logical, practical type of style, or are we needing to do more empathy and compassion and storytelling? If we're leading a group of people, we got to do both, right? Because we've got both styles of communication that are in the room. But sometimes we may be someone who really leans more into story. And so we're like, I want to tell you this story of how this is impacting folks. And they're not moving, they're not changing, they're not feeling inspired to make a change. And we have to say to ourselves, oh, they need data. Like, I need to share data with them. Or maybe we're saying, I've only been sharing data, and these people need some story. Like, I need to really talk about how this is impacting others. So it's important for us to think about both. We also want to think about what needs to be communicated. So it is very, very important when we're having these conversations to only share facts. So we want to get rid of descriptive words or adjectives. We want to just say this is the fact that happened. We don't want to say things like you are always late, right? We want to say, 3 out of the last 5 days you were late. Or I noticed that you weren't coming in on time. But we don't want to say words like always and never, because the thing is, it's not true. Very likely one time they weren't late, and they're going to argue with you about that, and that's not necessary. So we don't want to make these generalized kind of blanket statements using always and never. And we don't want to be really descriptive. And we can say, it seemed that you were upset about the situation. Your voice was raised, and you were pointing a finger, as opposed to you were screaming and going off on this kid. Well, they might tell you I was not screaming. Okay, fine. Your voice was raised. You were pointing a finger. Like, we're not describing what we think the behavior is. We're saying what the facts were that were observable and that were witnessed. We also want to refer to documents and specific information as much as possible. And again, use that third point. It's so helpful. Okay. When we're bringing these meetings to a close, and I think Valerie, you were talking about it earlier about what do we do, when we have to end it. So if it's not, sometimes these can just go on and on. Like, sometimes we can have people looping and we're having these longer conversations and we just need to end the meeting, or it's time to be ending the meeting and we're not quite sure how. This is what we do. We want to identify points of agreement, right? So as we discussed, and this is all in our planning guide, but as we discussed earlier, these are the areas that we agreed on. Thanks for partnering with me on this. When there is disagreement, then we want to use, and on our next slide, I'll show you some of these sentence stems. We want to use words like nevertheless, regardless, moving forward, and then we'll keep using that broken record technique so that we're just restating exactly what the expectation is. We also want to be very clear about the next steps. When we're in an escalated or even just heightened type of meeting, it can be challenging for people to even hold all the pieces there. They might just hold the feeling or how, one thing that was stated. And we want to be really clear what the next steps are and who's responsible for those. So we end the meeting by saying, here's what I have for the next steps. And here's when I have these are due or what we're looking for. Here's what I'm going to do. Here's what you're going to do. Here's what we're going to call this person about. When we're done, this is absolutely when we want to follow up in writing. And so we call these summary of conversations. This means, and what we'll say to folks is, when we're done, I'm going to just capture all this and send everybody an email so we have it together for us. And what we're doing in that email is we're identifying those points of agreement, we're listing out the next steps, and we're just letting them know, here we go, it's all captured for us. Some of those sentence stems that we like to use if when we do have those points of disagreement are saying things like moving forward, nevertheless, and yet, even so, all that being said, because what we're not saying is, no, you're wrong. Like, no, I don't agree with you at all. Like, yes, you said this, but I don't agree. What we're saying is, I hear you. And yet this is still the expectation. Yeah, I absolutely hear that you're upset about this. And even so, our handbook does state that this is what we need to do for our procedures and practices with our students.
Okay, and I just so wish we had more time. There's so much to talk about. I do encourage you to reflect on what are some actions or tools that you're going to incorporate that you heard today. If you have questions, we would really encourage you to send those to us. Our email is hello@connectingthroughconversation.com, and we would love to hear from you, and we can follow up for sure. We are going to be at the in-person virtual event on 2/27, 10 to 11:30. We're going to be talking about how to use some of these tools with kids and how to support everyone who you work with in doing the same thing. So we hope to see you there. It would be so incredibly useful if you could take just a minute to fill out this survey for us. It helps us a tremendous amount. It helps us get better and will also help us stay connected with you. Talking really fast because I know Liv has a final announcement. Thank you all so much. This was so fun.
Thank you, Tiffany and Erica. One round of applause for you guys. Thank you so much. And for the participants still in the space, enjoy your lunch break, and we invite you to join us for our little reception, our virtual reception tonight at 5:30. So keep an eye on your CVent attendee platform. If you haven't already registered for it or added it to your schedule, go ahead and do that. And everybody have a great rest of your day.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone. This was super fun.
Thank you.
Stay in
Thank you. And
touch.
Liv, thank you. You were
Yeah.
just